there was a time where good players, Canadian markets, all that talk. Do you think the contract negotiations or the idea of just the players leaving that, I don't know, Shanny, Dubas, the organization just couldn't stomach any of them leaving because they finally acquired some top-end talent and they had the ability to lock them up? Or what is your take on the contract negotiations of how the top-end players for the Leafs have been handled the last bunch of years?
You know what? It's the fear of the unknown. Like, what happens if you don't retain your really talented players and they go somewhere else and they have success? Because there was a track record of that happening here. Phil Kessel moved on. You had to trade Kessel. He won 2 cups. Tyler Bozak moved on. He won a cup. Nazem Kadri moved on. He won a cup. Like, there's been a track record of this happening, and you have supremely talented players. And a lot of people would tell you, I'll always bet on the talent. I'll bet on, those guys being able to find a way to break through because they can do it. And then the unknown is like, well, if you move on for those guys and you've built this, stable operation that's good year after year and making the playoffs, what happens if it fails? How do you answer that question at the end of the year when another guy moves on and wins a Stanley Cup? Like if that was Marner or Nylander or whoever. I think that fear of the unknown had to play a huge part in it. And the other part is like those guys, they were willing to bet on those talented players finding a way to break through. But let's also, we also have to say that the organization was very willing to, kind of hedge their bets by signing these guys and saying, we're going to be progressive. We're going to be proactive. The cap's going to go up. Well, it didn't go up for 4 years, and everyone had to deal with that. But I think with the way that front office was thinking at the time, they were trying to be ahead of the curve. And unfortunately, the curve kind of bit them back in a way that, they couldn't really maneuver anymore. So they were stuck with what they had. But it always, for me, comes down to, well, what happens if these guys move on and they succeed and we don't? How do we answer that question?
Frankie, I think one of the key moments in Shanahan's tenure here came 4 years ago when they blew the 3-1 series lead to the Canadiens, and Shanahan came out and said, we lack killer instinct. He brought that phrase into the vernacular Leafland, and he insisted at that time that they could acquire killer instinct. They could develop killer instinct internally and maybe externally too. Maybe they could bring in some guys with a little more killer instinct. But he made the human nature bet that you could change these guys, make them something they had not been. And to this day, I think we all have seen what we've seen when it comes to that category. How do you feel about that as somebody who's been in a room? Was that crazy of him to believe he could change these guys into killers?
It's not crazy to believe that because you don't know until you do it. Like you're not a killer until you are. You're not a winner until you're a winner. Like, there is an evolution there where guys have to find a way to become something that they haven't necessarily been. But you almost look back over the years and you say, well, why didn't you surround them with guys that have killer instinct? Why didn't you surround them with guys that have won? Like, you try and make moves over the years because you have this young nucleus of players. Maybe the priority should have been, we need to bring in guys that have been branded and labeled champions. Stanley Cup champions.
One of those guys, Frankie, was Patrick Marleau, of all guys.
The main guy.
Right.
The first guy.
He was one of the ones that wanted to just, you follow that guy and what he does. I was like, you gotta be.
Well, I mean, like that's a great example. That's a San Jose Sharks team that was the, decade ago version of what this team is, but not even, because those guys, they went to a cup final and they were going fairly deep into playoffs, and these guys didn't do that. And that's not to, disparage Patrick Marleau and the career he had, but
but the kicker was you had to give him the third year because he insisted on it, and then it just all went to hell, and then we know what happened after that.
Well, and you know what else I think was happening with that? I think older guys around the league who hadn't won saw how skilled these guys are and saw the operation that the Leafs were running and said, I might be able to attach myself to that and win because these guys are really good. And, McDavid and Draisaitl get that right now. But with the way things have gone the last little while, I can't honestly say that veteran guys who haven't won would look at this group and say, I'm going to attach myself potentially to a championship there. Like there's way too much runway now where that conversation has changed. Whereas, 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was so optimistic because these guys were so talented and so good in the regular season. It's not that right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, Max Pacioretty notwithstanding, I guess, right? He jumped on and he was hoping to help them win. But you're right. 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, it was like, I got to get in there. I got to get in there, and I got to be the guy that's riding shotgun with these guys. But that is the truth. I mean, the Marlowe deal, that one could have come up on the lowlights. You know, that they had to trade, they had to get rid of the contract. That pick turned into Seth Jarvis. Carolina just said, fine, we'll take Marlowe's 1-year deal because you don't know how to negotiate with anybody. And they absolutely sewered themselves, the Maple Leafs. And Marlowe, he had a really good first year when he was here. Really good player, good pro, by all accounts, good guy. But, yeah, not a winner.
Oh, they loved him, too, right? They were at the house all the time.
Always
like,
loved, that's the whole
with
thing.
the Marlowe family. But
Marlowe
you know what? You know,
took them under his wing.
And you can do the history lesson, Hayes, right? And say, like, this move was wrong, that move was wrong. Having been in the organization at that time, it felt like there was like a little bit of an odor on some of the guys who had been under the previous administration, where it was almost like we just have to turn a corner and move these guys out and bring in other guys that are fresh and new, where it's like you almost didn't have to label them that way. You just had to evaluate what actually are there. Like Tyler Bozak moved on to St. Louis. They loved him there. And he won a Stanley Cup, and he was slotted perfectly. You know, say what you want about Phil. Like, I get it. It was probably time to move on. Like Nazem Kadri, we talk about it all the time. But, like, you know, maybe you just had to have an individual conversation on the guys that you're dealing with, and not just kind of say, yeah, they were left over from before. We gotta move on from some of these guys. And, you know, the biggest one for me, and I know, like, Dion probably, like, wanted to go try and win somewhere. But I think it would have been so important for Matthews and Marner and Nylander to spend a year playing with Dion Phaneuf. I think that would have done them wonders. He is so good at, like, mentoring young players and relating to them and kind of, you know, just teaching them how to be good pros. But the timing didn't work out. Like, it was time for him to go try and win somewhere.
In this market, like, I don't know.
Yeah, I know.
From the inside, you know him as a great guy and everything, but it was... His time was up, too.
Yeah, let's not forget the Salute Gate happened right as Shanny arrived, right?
Yeah, that was probably why a lot of that odor that you referenced kind of was hanging around. But, yeah.
I'm sure he would want a mulligan on that.
Yep, I think so. And I think, like, honestly, you even look at, like, the Tavares signing. Like, we don't have to go through all this chronological order. But John represented what these other guys represented. Talent, wanted to be here.
Never won.
Score a goal, but it never won. Like, he wasn't coming here because it was like, man, this guy was a winner. It was, well, talented, scores, and loves Toronto. And, you know, and that's kind of that's what rings out, you know, throughout the years. Like, an eye for talent, tons of talent. Eye for wanting to be here and wearing the jersey and selling jerseys and making the playoffs, all that